Well, George, thanks for talking to us. Who are you and how are you associated with the B-58?
My name is George Holt Jr., and I'm a retired colonel, and I flew as a navigator bombardier in the B-58 at Grissom Air Force Base from 1966 to 1969.
Why is the B-58 important to you?
For a number of reasons. Before going into B-58s, I was a navigator bombardier in various bombers, 7 years in the B-47. And when I went into the B-58, it was the most pleasant experience in all of my life, because it was an aircraft that was very comfortable to fly, very reliable to fly, and it had a fantastic bomb nav system. It had Doppler and inertial navigation system, and most of my missions I would fly with the radar off, or the radar in standby, because the navigation system is so reliable. And you would go from standby to on every once in a while and reposition your crosshairs, but very often your crosshairs would be right on the point that you were trying to update. So it was very, very accurate navigation system.
So it was a pleasant flying experience.
Absolutely, yeah. No parachute. The seat was very comfortable, and after 7 years in the B-47 with a heavy parachute on my back, leaning over a nav table, that was a very uncomfortable experience. It was an airplane way ahead of its time in technological innovation. Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think it means to Fort Worth to have this airplane back here?
Well, it's a shame that we've only got 8 left out of all of the ones that we had. They were sent to the boneyard in January 1970, and then 7 years later they were sold to a junk dealer and destroyed, basically. So this is one of the 8 that's left, and Fort Worth should have it. This was the origin of the B-58 when Convair started their development of the B-58. So it's important in that respect.
It was quite a high-tech airplane for its day. What was your impression?
Absolutely. We used to fly low-level missions, and the delta wing on the B-58 was very solid. I remember standing on the tip of the wing one time when it was in the hangar, and I would jump up and down on the end of that wing, and it would move. Very often we would go into a low-level route, and it would be about an hour on the low-level route. And if a B-52 went in ahead of us and it encountered turbulence, they would declare max turbulence and they would abort the mission and climb out. We would go down and we would experience maybe light to moderate turbulence, and we'd just continue on to the target. Another thing about it is we have what's called stealth bombers today, but in many respects the B-58 was a stealth bomber because of its configuration. It had a very low radar cross-section, very hard to see on radar. And when we flew, we would fly as close to the ground as we could, even though we didn't have terrain avoidance radar. The pilots would get it right on down. And very often when I came into a target, the Nike site or the radar bomb scoring site would ask for our position because they couldn't pick us up on radar. And every once in a while they would ask us to pop up so they could latch onto us, okay? But that told me that in a wartime, the enemy radars would probably have a hard time seeing us in wartime, which was important. So we would pop up, they would lock on, and then we would go on in. The airplane was fast, Mach 2. People would ask me, what is it like to go through the Mach, to go Mach 1? And you never notice it. The only thing I ever noticed was my altimeter. As soon as we hit the speed of sound, the altimeter would go down about 500 feet and then come back on up. But otherwise, very quiet. And, it was amazing. Low-level missions, I mentioned I would fly silent quite often. No need to turn the radar on. You just had that much confidence in the bomb nav system. And it's an airplane that probably should never have been sent to the boneyard. I think it could still be flying today. It was strong structurally. I went to the Pentagon after I left B-58s, and while I was in the Pentagon, that's when they made the decision to get rid of the B-58s. I fought that decision because I was the B-58 planner in the Pentagon. And I worked for 3 days straight and tried to get it turned around. I went through all the air staff, got their concurrence, and I fought all of their rationale on why the B-58 should be taken to the boneyard. And when I got up to my one-star general, he said, Major Holt, you did a good job. I agree with all of your positions. However, General Ryan, Jack Ryan, who was the Chief of Staff at that time, had already gone to see the Secretary of Defense and told him he was going to get rid of the B-58s. And that was actually instigated by Strategic Air Command. Strategic Air Command wanted to keep 4 B-52 squadrons and get rid of 2 B-58 squadrons. It was a bad mistake. In fact, I wrote a book about it. It's called the B-58 Blunder, Why the U.S. Abandoned Its Best Strategic Bomber. And it's selling quite well. But it goes into all of the myths, the erroneous myths about the B-58, and why we should not have gotten rid of it.
Was the arrival of the F-111, did it have anything to do with the departure of the B-58?
There was a number of reasons. McNamara, Secretary of Defense McNamara, that was his push, was to get the FB-111 to replace the B-58. He knew very little about the B-58. And even many in Strategic Air Command knew very little about the B-58, unless they were a B-58 crew member. And there were very few of those in Strategic Air Command. So that was one reason. General LeMay, a lot of people say General LeMay hated the B-58. It's not so much that he hated it, but his big push was for the XB-70, the Mach 3 bomber. And they built 2 prototypes of the XB-70. Of course, McNamara did not want the XB-70. He wanted the FB-11, so there was that struggle there. And in the meantime, when time came to cut for the defense budget, they picked the B-58. A lot of people don't realize that the decision was to get them out of the inventory by 1970, but that's not true. McNamara relented at one time and let it go into the mid-70s. But SAC came in and said, no, we want to get rid of it by 1970.
So you had stopped flying the airplane by the time it was
Yeah,
retired.
I was at Grissom from 1966 to 69, and I got appointed to the Pentagon in 1969, and I was the B-58 representative in the Pentagon in the Plans Directorate.
So what happened to your job when the airplane was retired?
Well, I had a job in the Pentagon. Yeah, and then I went from the Pentagon, and then I became, eventually I became a wing commander of Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, and I had a fighter wing underneath me. I was the host commander, and they were converting into the A-10s, close air support aircraft. But I remember in the morning I would get up around 5 o'clock in the morning, and I used to go for a run, and I would run along the Mazdak fence, the boneyard, and I would see the B-58s lined up out there, and sometimes it brought tears to my eyes. Yeah, but that's how much you can become attached to an airplane.
Sure. Did you ever travel back to Fort Worth when the airplane was still being built here, or were they all built?
No, that was before my time. Yeah, it went into the Air Force in 1960, and started out in the mid-50s.
Did you come to Fort Worth for training?
Nope. I went to Mather Air Force Base, and then from there right into Grissom Air Force Base. The DSO, Defensive System Operators, and the pilots, they went together for their training. Yeah, but the Navigator Bombardiers went to a separate training. Yeah.
Any memorable missions?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it's a fast bomber, okay? But it's variable in its speed. And in the book, I talk about a story about Al Dugard. He's my pilot, fantastic pilot. We were flying bomb runs over Chicago, okay? And we were in a hellacious jet stream. It must have been over 200 knots. And as we were coming into the target, we were very slow, but when we turned around, we were like a bat out of hell going the other way. So I said, Al, I'm gonna do something for us. So I computed an airspeed that he could fly, okay, that would give us 0 ground speed going into the target. And he had to have the nose up fairly high, you know, he had to be very careful because the B-58 doesn't stall like a normal airplane, it just goes down, okay. But he kept it on that pitch, and I'm looking at my Doppler ground speed, and I'm counting down, you know, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. I says, okay, Al, we're at 0 ground speed. The Nike site, they went crazy. They said, Delta 5-1, is this an emergency? You know, what's happening up there? Because the pen plot, you know, they're tracking us inbound, and that's how they score the bomb. The pen plot stopped. The only reason could be you either crash or you blew up in the air, you know. So Al says, he says, George, I can't hold this much longer. I says, okay, go ahead on in. We want to make sure we get credit for the bomb run. And then he calls the Nike site. He says, gave him the call sign. He says, we just stopped to eat our flight lunches. And that was one experience. So that's how slow the airplane could fly, and it could also fly very fast. And
How fast do you think it would fly?
and as far as Mach goes, yeah, you could get up. The engines weren't the limiting factor. You know, it could fly the airplane as fast as it wanted to. It was the skin temperature, and we get up to maybe 2.2. Al flew a lot more supersonic missions than I did because he was an instructor pilot. But I think he got up to about 2.24 at one time. But it's all based on skin temperature. Yep.
Did you have any emergencies in the airplane?
No, never did. Never had an emergency. I had a navigator friend of mine that bailed out, and his capsule chute never opened, and he was killed on impact when it went in. Mm-hmm. The pilot and DSO, they survived. But I talk about that in my book, and it was very, very sad. They used the wrong viscosity oil or grease, you know, for a pin that fires the pressure capsule, you know, that opens the chute, and that failed. So when they found him on the ground in a cornfield, the fingers on his right hand were down to the bone because he was trying to pull out the emergency handle. The problem is the emergency handle doesn't come out, okay, until the chute comes out. So, yeah, very, very unfortunate. Mm-hmm. Fatalities are overstated. A lot of the fatalities occurred while the airplane was in development by Convair. They lost a lot of good Convair test crews, and when it became operational, they had some fatalities, but you have to look at that in perspective. You know, some of those were ground accidents. For example, one ground accident, the airplane was repaired and it was put back in commission, but they still count that as a ground accident. Yeah. The two accidents that we had in Paris, both of those were destroyed. Okay. But they were doing something that they probably should not have been doing at an air show. You know, you don't take a bomber like that and try to do something special. So it was unfortunate. And those were good crews. They were very professional crews. Yeah. But all in all, it was a technological wonder. I think it could still be flying today. And it's just sad that the Air Force couldn't have thought twice before they got rid of it.
Don is interested in a lot of the electronics, and I'm not even sure they were electronics, tubes and so forth that were used in the aircraft.
Yep.
And even though it was a high-tech airplane, it had a lot of
it started off with vacuum tubes. The bomb nav system was relatively unreliable. However, in 1960, that airplane went to a Strategic Air Command bombing competition. Okay, and it actually took the trophy for the bombing portion of that competition. And they were flying against B-47 and B-52 crews, you know, some of the best. A lot of times, this was before my time. I think by the time I got there from 66 to 69, they were transitioning to a new bomb nav radar system, which was much more reliable. But friends of mine would tell me about going into reverse airflow, because if the electronics would heat up too quickly, you would lose them. So what they would do, they would go through reverse airflow. Instead of the air conditioning coming into the compartment first, they would go through the equipment, and it would really heat up where you were sitting. Tom Hatch is a friend of mine, navigator bombardier. He recalls stripping down to his waist because it got so hot in there. Yeah. But by the time 66 to 69, everything had been done to the airplane that was supposed to be done. It went through what was called IRAN. They took care of all of the stresses in the airplane, reconditioned. It was very extensive IRAN. And it also had what was called a triple redundant yaw dampener system installed. This was to preclude the airplane going into a side slip and destroying itself. If you lost an engine, it would automatically kick in opposite rudder, you know, before the pilot did. Yeah.
Any other thoughts about the B-58 you'd like to remember for us?
It was, I'm on Facebook a lot, and a lot of people, especially young people, they know nothing about the B-58, but they seem interested in it.
This airplane has a large fan base.
It does, yeah, it does. And other people, they say the first model that they ever built was a B-58. That's how much they liked it. Yeah.
Well, thank you for talking to us.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.